Good morning. I'm Mr. Crawford. You may have me in class already if you're doing this in the new school year for 2020 and 21, or you might be one of the AP students that's doing this during the Corona time. So we're going to be talking today about the Cold War, and let me get the thing pulled up. Um, anyway, hope everybody's staying healthy and safe and everything, and we're going to go ahead and get this started right about now. And here we go. There we go. We're in this lesson. We're going to be learning about how the United States and Soviet Union became adversaries during the Cold War. This drawing shows the U.S., of course, as Uncle Sam. Russia is there, like our symbol is the eagle. Russia's is a bear, so that's why that's shown that way. And you can see they're kind of balanced on top of the whole world. We're called what's called superpowers. This lesson picks up right at the end of World War II in 1945, and we're on the left, and of course the Soviets, which is Russia, is on the right. Russia and Soviet Union are the same thing. So they were just called the Soviet Union from 1917 until 1991. And our system of government and economy is capitalist and democratic, and theirs is communist, and that's where we're going to be talking about today. At the end of World War II, we had two conferences. There was one at a place called Yalta, and as you can see here, it was. Let me get my little pointer worked up. There we go. There, that'll be a little bit better. You have Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin, the leaders of the Allied nations, and they're deciding what to do at the end of the war. A few months later, we had different leaders in a couple of different cases, and they had a different conference there and everything. But some of the things they were trying to do were to there we go. They wanted to figure out what to do with Germany, and of course, they want to avoid what happened at the end of World War One, where Germany was punished so severely that it led to World War Two. So, what they're going to do is they're going to split Germany into four zones. There's a French, British, a U.S., and a USSR. That's Soviet Union or Russia, and they're going to split the city of Berlin also into four zones. And I'm going to show you a problem with this a little bit later in this with the way they split it up, and they're also going to create a United Nations. Remember, they had a League of Nations at the end of World War One that we didn't even join, but at the end of this one, we are going to decide to. It's time for us to join the United Nations and kind of head the thing up. Um, anyway, the second conference was not as important there. Capitalism versus communism, our system of governments. Capitalism with a free market, and communism is where you're forced to share everything. So, one thing about communism, you may be looking at this list and wondering why anybody would want to be communist or why a country would choose to be communist. And you can pause this if you need to answer any of the questions you may have. But let me just tell you that the reason a country would choose communism is if they were desperate for food, is basically the thing that makes a country turn communist. It is a way to get people fed, but it's kind of a miserable way to live and everything. So, um, continuing, this map shows what's called the Iron Curtain. It's not literally a wall like this. In most cases, it's kind of a line of countries that are lined up with the Soviet Union because they're kind of the protector of those countries. We'll see it on a map here in just a second. But anyway, the wall is shown right there. Now, usually the countries here it is. Here's a better view of it. It's the ones in green here are the communist countries, and they're the ones that are more lined up with the Soviet Union and in fact more close in proximity to the Soviet Union as well. The purple ones are the ones that are lined up most of the time with the United States here. And you'll see there's a couple of exceptions. We're going to talk about Greece and Turkey here in a couple of minutes. But the dark black line shows that's kind of the line between communist and non-communist countries. There. Okay, our policy after World War II is to try to contain communism. We're not going to try to turn the Russians from being communists, but we're going to try to keep countries from turning communist, and that's where Greece and Turkey came in here. There's the Truman Doctrine. You'll have a question over that. What that is, we have a responsibility to help any free nation trying to resist being taken over by a communist country there and everything. But if you'll remember, containment, that's the big thing, is trying to keep that from spreading. That's going to come up again when we talk about Korea and Vietnam in today's lesson and in future lessons there. Another map. Okay, let me show you the problem with the way they divided up Germany. Germany was divided into four different sections, which become two because the U.S., British, and French parts combined to form West Germany. The Soviet portion of it, because remember, Soviet Union was a ally during World War II, although we didn't really like them. But they split off and formed a separate country, East Germany. And then remember that Berlin was also split into four pieces. Well, if you see here on this map, Berlin is all the way located within East Germany. So they have that split up four different ways too. That's going to mean when we had to try to help people in Berlin, we're going to have to fly supplies in. We can't get supplies in through trains or trucks or whatever. It has to be flown in, and that'll come up in a minute here. There, that's and well, it comes up right here. The Berlin airlift, and there was they Stalin, the Soviet premier, banned all shipments to West Berlin through East Germany because you did have to go through East Germany to get to West Berlin. I know that's a little confusing, but we anyway. The point is we have to us three, U.S., Britain, and France, mostly us, are developing or excuse me, delivering supplies. We have to do it through the air. There are helicopters and everything. And when I was at your age, I'd heard about this, and I always just thought it was for a few days, but it's more than a year. And the Soviets finally end that practice there and everything. You may remember that we used to not like alliances, but after World War II, there is a need for an alliance, and ours is called NATO. That's the one that's called the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. You can see the members there, and then the USSR, the Russians have their own called the Warsaw Pact. Notice that the two parts of Germany are split between the two organizations. So, anyway, this also comes up in the Korean War, and you'll see this go through. Feel free to pause as you need to. The country of Korea split into two. The north side, you can't see on this map, but that right there, that white part is China, and then they're more closely allied with China, which becomes a communist country as well. And so we're going to help the blue part, which is South Korea, which and it's still divided up today, basically about at the same place. That's called the 38th parallel. It's not exactly on the line, but that's okay. Feel free to backtrack through this, and you'll kind of see how the North kind of invaded the South, and then when we come in and help, then we push up to China. Um, there's a scene where Douglas MacArthur, the World War II general for us, wants to invade China, and he's fired by Truman because he keeps mouthing off about it and everything. So anyway, that's the Korean War right there. Feel free to read more about it. You won't have a lot about this one. It's kind of an old map, isn't it? Yeah. And here's some things. This is never actually a declared war. It's more called a police action. And China does try to help the North by sending troops down and everything, but it kind of goes back to the way it was there and everything. So anyway, that's part of containment. We want to keep South Korea from turning communist because it sure looks like they're about to, and that's kind of how this is today, all these years later. There's the Korean War. It kind of winds up being a stalemate or a tie. There's some things here. Um, yeah, today, if MacArthur had asked to invade China and was told no, he'd probably get on Twitter and say something about it. But back then, he talked to the newspapers and everything. And it goes to 1953. And it's, like I said, it stayed about the same. And they still have that demilitarized zone today you might have heard about. So, anyway, this is what's called a proxy war. So, it's really us against the Soviets, or China there, but it's really in the Koreas there and everything. Its containment extended to the rest of the world, and nowadays we have strong ties with South Korea, and so it was a good idea to help there. And some of the companies you may know include, and they left the biggest one out. Samsung is the biggest of those companies, I believe. Those are some companies you may have heard of. That we have an LG refrigerator. Eisenhower Doctrine has to do. There's the Truman Doctrine. That's the one where we're going to help any country um, that was had under threat of being, taken over by a communist country, and Eisenhower extends that as president there. And then China, yeah, here's some stuff about China there. China, the reason China is such a big deal is that Yeah, there's some capture of some U.S. airmen. You don't need to really know about that, but anyway, the reason China's such a big deal is it's the largest country in the world in terms of population, and when it turns communist, that's a big wake up call for the United States. And then the concept of brinksmanship is that the Soviets have the hydrogen bomb like we have. Now we can both blow each other up, and so we step out of development. And the idea is that if we both have all these weapons, then nobody's going to attack anybody because they're going to be afraid of getting attacked themselves. There, it's basically going to the brink of war, but where the idea is not to actually go to war because we're just going to blow each other up. Then in 1957, the Soviets launched this little thing called Sputnik, which is all it was is a little metal ball that kind of beeped in the air. It's sort of um, like a little GPS thing because they could track where it was and everything. And the big deal about this is that in the United States, when people got wind of this, they started worrying that the Soviets had bombs that they were going to be able to shoot through the outer space at us and everything. So anyway, it causes a lot of changes in America at that point with science programs in school being ramped up and everything. And then the last thing for today's lesson is this what's called a military industrial complex is basically the link between the military and our economy there, and we got that industries, employment, finance there, and everything, and advancing science and technology. Just kind of a famous thing that was said during this time by Eisenhower there and everything. And there's yeah, you can see right there. Feel free as you need to go back to anything you may have missed to answer questions, and you'll be fine. Again, I hope everybody's staying. That's the end of that part. I hope everybody's staying safe, and we will hopefully be seeing you soon. Thank you.